Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. Okay, live here on AMP. Thursday morning, opening night, National Football League with my main man, Stuckey, back again. It feels like we've been doing this for years. You can find him on the Action Network. Betting extraordinaire, Lexington, Kentucky. I guess he lives there. He's a native of Philadelphia, correct?
Correct.
Stuckey, how you doing, bro?
Good. It's good to be all the way back. We are about to hit the full swing, right? We got NFL tonight. College football is already in full swing. So we got the full platter on deck from now through the Super Bowl and through March Madness. So yeah, well rested and ready to grind another football season.
Do you have any big plays last weekend in college? You nailed Duke.
I had the under in that game, but I was overjoyed to watch. Duke football is not like Duke basketball. Duke football is like the little guy that you root for, and just overjoyed to see Dabo go down. And he's just been so stubborn. I think we're going to talk about Colorado and Nebraska in not adjusting to the modern era of college football, not taking advantage of the transfer portal, and he's falling behind. And you saw Florida State, a team they're competing with in the ACC. One of their best players in the field against LSU was a wide receiver they got from Michigan State in the spring that they added on. And so yeah, it was that was a fun game.
Totally. I mean, I talked to some people that work in college football, and they said it's kind of crazy how adamant he is that, like, they're kind of guys, they got to recruit college football, or high school football. They don't do the transfer portal, and it was fucking glaring the other night.
Yep.
But let's dive in. NFL/college, probably the story of football still. We'll start with a couple games in college football. Obviously, college football, the story of it is primetime. The line, I mean, this is a historic rivalry that has not been played because they changed conferences, both of them years ago. One went to the Pac-12, the other went to the Big Ten. Nebraska had fallen on hard times. Colorado had really fallen on hard times. Primetime rolls in, game of the day, enormous ratings. I don't know a soul who wasn't watching that bad boy. This is a weird spot because it's hard to be a letdown when it's going to be a home opener that is going to be like a religious experience. But it is an early morning kickoff, right? They're mountain time, so it's 10 a.m. kickoff, so the body clock's a little weird. I know I guess they kicked off last week a little early, but it was still Texas. They get an extra hour. I didn't watch too much in Nebraska, Minnesota. It was pretty boring. Clearly, Nebraska struggles to score. That's not Colorado's issue, but Colorado sucks on defense beside Deion's kid and Travis Hunter, who never comes off the field. It feels like every single human alive that gambles is going to take Colorado this weekend. Am I crazy?
Yeah, I think everyone, if not Nebraska, Colorado might be the most bet football game of the weekend, including the NFL in a market that's been open for months. Nebraska, Colorado, the most bet game of a football week. It feels like the 90s. It's like Rashaan Salam going to be carrying the ball for Colorado. But I don't know. For me, I'm not betting the game. Everyone could be right. Odds makers, some professional bettors could be wrong. This is a new phenomenon in college football. I'll tell you that, Colorado was one of the worst teams in the country last year. They would have been like plus 35 against TCU last week with that roster last year. They were plus 20.5. Obviously, the line was wrong. Should they have been plus 14, plus 10? It's one data point. But you have a brand new staff. I love the staff that Deion assembled. You have an entirely new roster. And so you have professional bettors, you have odds makers who don't want to adjust the team too much off one data point, right? You can't be like, all right, this team is 2 touchdowns better than I thought. But they could be. They could be way better. And this is it's not like we have a long history of teams that have done this, right? Just, all right, let's blow up, bring in a whole new staff, kick everyone off the team and bring in everyone else through the portal.
It's an expansion team.
Yes, with a lot of talent. There's not a lot of depth, but the talent, for the starters on both sides, including one who amazingly played 100 and whatever snaps on both sides of the ball. It's very difficult for me to adjust Colorado to where they should be. I need some more data points. I mean, I made it -1. I would have made it like +6 last week. I adjusted them a touchdown, which is unheard of after 1 week. So I don't know. Everyone is going to bet them. The books are going to need Nebraska bad, but everyone could be right. Like, this is just an unprecedented situation. I will say, as you said before, must-see TV. Everyone's going to tune in to see this. And the most likely outcome is that Colorado probably wins by like 1-3 on a missed Nebraska field goal, because all Nebraska's done, I think they're like 2-14 in one-possession games over the last 3 years. Their defense looked good. Their quarterback's a turnover machine, and they just can't close out games. I feel bad for Nebraska fans, but I'll be tuning in, but I won't be betting that game.
Okay, the game of the day in college football that has been circled for a long time. It was incredible last year, right? If Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt, Texas upsets them. Even in a loss, it's like Sark's defining moment as a head coach. His greatest moment as a head coach is literally a close loss at home to Saban, who, for his standards, what would you say? I mean, that's one of the worst Alabama teams of his run of all the championship teams, and they were still pretty good relative to the rest of college football. This team, I followed Nick Saban and the program relatively closely just on social media. He's been very positive this offseason. I think he feels pretty good about his squad. Obviously, last year, even though they lost, it was kind of embarrassing to them. The line's pretty big. I got a 7.5. Bama's at home, Tuscaloosa. Hard to judge them last week, but I didn't think Texas looked very good. And listen, two coaches I'm fucking out on: Brandon Staley, Steve Sarkisian. Like, I don't trust those guys regardless of their talent. Though, I got some NFL buddies that have gone through Austin. They're like, this team is pretty stacked. Like, if you put Nick Saban as their head coach, we'd be talking about them to win the national championship. So it's probably a stay away. Just that if this was like 6, I'd take Bama. A little nervous, 7.5. I could see them scoring enough points to, cover that line. But I could see this getting ugly.
Yeah, I did bet Texas. I like them at 7.5. Gotta find that hook, which is important, as you alluded to. And yeah, this Texas team overall has a top 5 roster. You just go talent. They finally have, they have a top 5 offensive line on paper. The defense is finally back. So that staff over time, they've had I think 3 straight top 5 recruiting classes, so it makes sense. They finally built the depth. They built the interior in order to compete with the top tier in the SEC. It's all there for this Texas team. It just comes down to the quarterback. And look, we couldn't really tell much from Alabama last week. They played a real, Middle Tennessee State team that lost everything, lost their quarterback, top 3 receivers. They shot themselves in the foot. Now, Alabama was buttoned up. Last year, they had some issues with like penalties and, just mental mistakes, but they didn't have any of that last week, which was a good sign with Texas on deck. The Texas defense looked great. They won 37-10, I think, over Rice. The question, and this is all what it's going to come down to, is because I have these teams like talent-wise right now with questions at quarterback for Alabama still. We need to see more from Milroe. It's going to come down to Ewers throwing the ball downfield. Last year, he was 38% when the ball traveled 15-plus yards. His footwork is just a mess. It was something I wanted to watch in the offseason. Like, okay, now he's got Arch there, another 5-star behind him. Is he going to work on that? If the rumors are he just has too big of an ego and he thinks that his arm talent is too great. Last week against Rice, 0 of 7 on balls that traveled 15-plus yards down the field, missed 2 wide open touchdowns, even to Worthy, who was wide open down the field. And that's the key to the game, because last year when they played TCU, Ewers was awful because TCU said, you have to beat us downfield. They brought everyone up. They took everything away. They took Bijan away, and Ewers couldn't hit anything downfield. So that's what I assume Bama's going to do that. And he has to hit a couple passes downfield early. If he can, Texas can win this game because that's going to open everything else up. And Alabama lost 3 defensive backs to the NFL. They have 2 starters that got hurt last week who are questionable this week, which is something big to watch because, you're already trying to replace 3 guys that left for the NFL. I took the 7.5 just from a numbers perspective. This Texas team has the talent to play with Alabama, but keep an eye early on. And then his confidence too is probably going to go in that raucous stadium. Can he hit Worthy, or can they have really talented receivers? Can he hit a couple deep shots early? If they do, this will be a thriller. If he doesn't, could get ugly.
Yours is like the Jeff George, Jay Cutler of college football right now.
Yep. Yeah, and it would be interesting to see if like he's not hitting them. Do they
go to the bullpen?
Texas? Yeah, and not many teams have the luxury that Texas does. A 5-star, then Arch Manning. But yeah, it'll be really fascinating to watch. But just when I watch him too, like last week, some of the deep throws he had, his footwork was just a little wonky, and it didn't. Now it's a small sample size, but it didn't look like he fixed it, and I think that's going to be the key to the game early on.
Listen, Deion's star is shining bright. Can you imagine if they went to the pen and Arch came in and took down Bama in his first moment? I mean, you talk about Deion. You're going to be joined at the top of the college football mountain, Arches as a storyline. That would be freaking sweet. That's I'm rooting for Bama, but I'm cool with Texas winning it if that happens. Let's dive into the NFL. No one likes a good dog, especially early in the season, like my man Stuckey. I can't disagree with him because there are some lines that are relatively big. Before we dive into the games you like, listen, I think Arizona's going to suck. They're going to be awful. I think when the dust settles, I'm going to have some coin on them at +7 against Washington. That feels like, to me, a tie game in the fourth quarter written all over it. What really quick, I know we didn't discuss this before, but am I crazy?
No, I mean, weird things happen in week 1 in the NFL. So if you're thinking about, hey, I'm just going to parlay all these teams that look like they're going to win, don't do that, especially in the NFL. Weird things happen. Yeah, I mean, asking a Washington team with an unproven quarterback and who knows if McLaurin's going to play if he's 100%. I know they're optimistic he is, but who knows? You're asking them to win by more than one touchdown to cover your number, even though Arizona's probably going to be horrendous. We don't even know who's going to play quarterback. So yeah, I wouldn't blame you if you did. But yeah, I mean, just think, and I'll throw a couple examples out. Last year, Pitt won at Cincy. Right. Since like early in the season, you're going to have weird results. And just to throw out a number, since 2003, over the past 20 seasons, division dogs in week 1, 64, 44, and 2 against the spread, hitting at 60%. And Division 1 dogs that missed the playoffs the previous season, 58, 27, and 2 against the spread over the past 20 years. Close to 70% against the spread. When they're getting more than a field goal, 41 and 17 against the spread since 2003. This week that applies to the Browns, Raiders, Panthers, and Rams, and there's and the Colts as well. There's a lot of teams that people think are bad early in the season, and assume teams that did well last year are going to be good, and a lot of times it just doesn't play out that way. I love to hunt for some what I consider undervalued dogs in week 1.
Think about an incredible example. The Pittsburgh's pretty good example. Obviously, they finished strong. The Bears literally had the number 1 overall draft pick, and they beat the fucking Niners, who won 13 games. So it's like anything. Now, obviously, the quarterback changed quickly. Who knows if Jimmy had started that game? But still, I mean, obviously, Frank Reich was losing every game he ever coaches in week 1. So let's start with the Colts, who back with Frank always lost to the Jags before the Jags got good. And I think the Jags are going to be pretty good. I don't know where you stand, but I view them. I like them more than the Titans. I just think Doug and Trevor are going to take off. But this week, at Jacksonville, I think they're now, I don't want to call them the hunted, but they're a team that everyone looks at like a legitimate operation now. Obviously, you add Ridley. Trevor, I think a lot of people are picking as like a Pro Bowl level guy consistently. And the Colts, who knows? I mean, Jonathan Taylor's on PUP. Can their quarterback complete passes? But this is the classic spot where you look up and it's going in the fourth quarter and the Colts are up 20-13. And you're like, how is this happening? It has it written all over it. So who you like in this bad boy?
Yeah, I'm taking the points of the Colts too. I don't like this team at all this year. I bet their win total under. I'm not a fan of Anthony Richardson. I just don't think he's ready yet. Now, he sort of has like Fields vibes. Even Hurts early on his career. Now, Hurts has taken the leap. Fields still has yet to. I think, Richardson, just if you look at his accuracy numbers, even behind a really good offensive line last year at Florida, they weren't there. I don't expect them to be there in the NFL this year. But this is the time, I think, that you want to back him, a first-time head coach, good offensive mind. There's a lot of uncertainty here. And, we're going to, once people start to get film on what they want to do with Richardson and kind of get him out of his comfort zone, I think it's going to be a real struggle for the Colts. So while I wouldn't be surprised that this is your AFC South special, we've seen so many times over the last 5 years where usually these roles are reversed, but the Colts tying the Texans, the Jags, and upsetting the Colts, and these teams go on to lose like 13, 14 games. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Colts have a really rough year, but without Taylor might work in their favor here. You're going to see a little more tempo, and the Jags secondary is still really bad, right? And they have some injuries now in the front seven that might impact this game as well. But this is Richardson in his first game. Yeah, there's not a lot of film on what they want to do with him, and it's a really bad Jacksonville secondary. So I think the Colts can actually have some success here. A sneaky little over too, if you're looking for a total, because Jacksonville started to go a lot faster, throw a lot more. Lawrence broke out the second half of last season. Then you add Ridley, and it's still a really bad Colts defense. But home divisional dog, week 1 here. I'm taking the points and holding my nose.
Yeah, I got some boots on the ground on that staff, and the one thing they mentioned is they think their offense has a chance to be really, really good. Major question marks on defense.
Yeah.
So they could be one of those classic teams, 10-win team, scoring a ton of points, giving up a lot of points. Honestly, looking like a primetime CU squad.
Yeah.
And Ridley, if you're into fantasy, I think he's got a chance to have a pretty big year for them. Obviously, Christian Kirk did last year. ETN's kind of your modern day hybrid, pass catching back. Okay,
the good thing with Ridley is that if Ridley is, it's kind of a weird situation. We haven't seen much, a big data set on receivers in his age just missing 2 years and coming back. We'll see but if he had just even close to the speed that he had before, just opening up the top of opposing defenses can open up so much more underneath for Kirk and company, for Lawrence to operate even a more efficient offense after we saw him break out in the second half of last year. So really interested to see what they do with Ridley and how it impacts everyone else as well.
I think one thing you're going to see is they view him and Kirk as kind of interchange. Like they can pump Ridley into the slot, same with Christian Kirk, and then kind of move those guys around, kind of little 49ers with Ayuk and Debo. You can kind of move them all around. And then obviously you have a dynamic running back and a good pass catching tight end. Their offense could be really fun to watch. Talk about a team that might not be that fun to watch as the season goes on would be the Buccaneers, who to me, I think have the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. We'll have a chance to be talking about them by about the middle of October. But they're playing a team that I know you and most people in the gambling sphere, in the number sphere, thought it was kind of crazy what they were doing, all the one-score games. It obviously came to a head in the playoff game when they lost to the Giants. A lot of people are picking Minnesota to come back to earth. Hell, if you win 9 games, that's a 4, game swing from last year. That would be pretty big. Kirk Cousins, that thing could get weird fast. He's last year of his contract. There's already been some talks. Like if it got weird, would they trade him? I don't really know what his trade market would be. But, the Buccaneers, this is another classic. Team's going to be bad. More than likely, they'll end up trading people by early October. But you look up, or are they in a tie game going into the fourth quarter? This has it written all over to me too. And I think Baker Mayfield's terrible. But week 1, I'm probably with you on this one. I'm going with the dog.
Yeah, I mean, even if the Vikings duplicate what they did last year, they wouldn't cover this game. Even if they win 13, they won every game by like 3 points. So asking them to win by margin here is difficult. Look, Minnesota, you mentioned it. There were rumors that they tried to trade up for Bryce Young. And I think this is the last year of Cousins. They can still be competitive because their division's terrible. The NFC is still terrible, but they're quietly rebuilding, knowing that they need to get, they have arguably the best receiver in the NFL. They have a really good left tackle, good tackle situation. Everything else needs to be kind of blown up, and the Cousins, you can't pay Cousins, $6 billion a year at his age.
No.
So, they're quietly rebuilding. Look at all the veterans they got rid of from that team last year. Zadarius Smith, Kendricks, their running back. I think they got rid of 6 or 7. Cook. I think 6 or 7 veteran guys. So they're not.
Those were former Pro Bowl players.
Yep.
I mean, they were their core guys making the playoffs for all those years.
Yep, they're Peterson, their primary corner. Like so, they're a less. I agreed with all the moves from a long-term roster construction perspective, but they're a less talented team than they were last year. That was a fraudulent 13-win team. the defense, I have a lot of respect for Brian Flores. The defense is bad. Like you look at the secondary, they're not going to be able to generate pressure naturally, which is how if you can do that against Baker Mayfield, he folds like a cheap tent. They're not going to be able to do that. And that's ultimately the Bucs offensive line's a big problem. You lose a couple guys, you're moving Wirfs from right to left side. But I don't think that's as big of a concern here. The Bucs still have two really good receivers going up against a horrible Vikings secondary. And the Bucs defense, it's still, look, they don't have a lot of depth. And later in the year, that could be disastrous. I think the offensive line is eventually going to cost them. Like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if Evans gets traded, in a couple weeks. And who knows? It's going to get ugly quick. But the defense still, the starting 11, have a lot of talent at all three levels. It's still a really good, really talented secondary that can match up with some of these receivers. Still it's an aging Cousins who I think is going to start to slip. Too many points. And for what it's worth, Cousins is a favorite of more than 4 points. 11, 18, and 1 against the spread in his career, 38%, including 7, 15, and 1 at home. That's 32%. I'll happily take the 6 here. Wouldn't be surprised if the Bucs won outright. But more than likely, it's probably going to be, and everyone's going to be laughing, it's going to be another one of the 3-point Vikings wins.
What's funny is I get so many DMs. Vikings actually have a sneaky big fan base. They're like, you're underselling us, our defense, with Brian Flores. And I think the one thing that you can get by with a great offensive mind, I think you'll see it this year probably with Andy Reid with some randoms. He can turn in. He did it forever in Philly. Kyle Shanahan has a history. You can turn randoms into solid players. It's much harder on defense. Like Vic Fangio was a great coach in San Francisco when he had a loaded squad with Harbaugh. Hasn't been as good other spots. Chicago, the one year they get Khalil Mack, he's a star again, right? It's a little college football, in my opinion, with the Jimmies and the Joes on top of the X's and O's. Look at the 49ers have been Saleh and D'Amico. It's because they have great players. It's hard to beat some elite. Belichick and Parcells turned into Belichick and Parcells with all those dudes in LT. You can't overcome, that's why the Dolphins I'm not as high on. You lose Jalen Ramsey. There's still some question marks. Like, it's just, when you got great players and you give me a great defensive coordinator, okay, you're going to be a top 5 defense. I take that away. It's much harder, especially with the rules today. So I'm Minnesota. I think a lot of people are like, well, they got Brian Flores now. Like you said, look at their personnel. Zimmer was awesome when he coached the Bengals and they were loaded. And then he became the head coach of Minnesota and they nailed a bunch of draft picks. As those guys got older, Dan Quinn, look at him now. He's viewed as one of the best defensive coordinators. Well, was he the village idiot in Atlanta, or their players just suck? So I
look there for and the counter to the Vikings, and the Vikings have a lot of passionate fans. Starting with the guy, one of my favorite sounds in the NFL is the guy who blows the horn at their home games whenever it's like third down. But the counter to that is I really like the hire that the Bucs made at offensive coordinator, former McVay guy. So there's familiarity there with Baker, who was with the Rams shortly last year. But Leftwich was just the play calling, the early down play calling was terrible last year for the Bucs. So I think there's going to be an improvement there from a play calling perspective. But you're right. Look at Belichick, 25-25 overall record since Brady left. Like you need players, and you need to. Otherwise, there's just only so much you can do.
Okay, let's go with the Titans. Titans Saints. My guy Hainer just got popped for PEDs. Now he was the third quarterback, but still, that hurts me. A lot of buzz on New Orleans. Listen, Dennis Allen's record speaks for itself, but I think their division's pretty terrible. I like them to win the South. I don't know about you. I think Derek, listen, he's been a polarizing player over the years, but if he just, last year was somewhat of an outlier, if he is just, floating between that middle tier, somewhere between 12 and 15 quarterback in the league, they're in pretty good shape. But the Titans are that classic team, and we talk about it all the time with Tomlin as a dog and people disrespecting him. That's kind of when he thrives. I'm just not as bullish on the Titans this year. I think this is the year Derek falls off a cliff. But this early spot where they clearly have the coaching matchup, and you could argue if they're both just solid, Tannehill and Derek are a wash, right? So usually if those, the most important thing, quarterback, coach, you could argue advantage Titans. I do think this place is going to be nuts. I do think they got a lot of positive momentum coming in for the Saints fans. Like they believe again. It's going to be a tough place to play, which it feels like it's kind of dimmed out a little bit last year, despite having a really good defense. This is probably a stay away from me. I just can't get behind the Titans. And I guess I'm a believer in the Saints, but I would like to see a couple games first.
Yeah, I'm taking the Titans here. I took +3.5 and some. I would still take +3. I look Vrabel, for what it's worth, 14-6-1 against the spread, 70% as a road underdog of 3 or more points. And he's just the guy that squeezes the most out of his roster year in and year out. He's gone over his preseason win total 4 or 5 years. The one exception was last year when they were sitting 7-3, the reigning number 1 overall seed in the AFC, and then they were devastated by injuries. They were the unluckiest team in the league last year by aggregate games lost in the injury department, and they lost 7 straight. They were even in some close games with, Dobbs, and the quarterback situation was horrendous. So they're going to be much healthier coming into this year. I'm a little worried about the offensive line. Your projected starting right tackle, Petit Ferrer, he suspended the first 6 games. But it's not as big of a concern against this Saints team, which has weakened over the years in their defensive front 7 and just natural pass rushing prowess. I mean, Cam Jordan's not getting any younger. You add Hopkins, I think that opens up things for Burks. I actually I was a Tajay Spears truther at Tulane. I think he can provide some things on third down and in the passing game. And the interior of that Titans defense, I think, can cause some chaos and take advantage of a fairly vulnerable interior Saints offensive line. And that's really how you kind of disrupt Carr, who I actually like more than most, but he's not the most mobile guy in the world. So if you can generate interior pressure, that's really how you disrupt a Carr offense. And he's in a new scheme here. It might take some time. And you said it best of all, the coaching advantage here. I'll happily take a field goal in this particular matchup, which should be, I think, a close game throughout. So I'll happily take the 3 and keep it in my back pocket.
Okay, the Jordan Love, Justin Fields Bowl. I think if you remove all the quarterback hype, like does Jordan Love, what does he look like? Because no one really knows. And then is Justin Fields actually good, or is he just a runner? And you just look at all the other players on the team, the Packers are dramatically better than the Bears, right? Their roster is, I mean, it's in a different, it's on a different level. Now, I did see, and I know you monitor this stuff closely, their 2 wide receivers have hamstring issues, which makes me a little nervous. But they're built like they have no problem, especially LaFleur has really closer ties to Kyle in terms of he really wants to run the ball. And obviously they've talked a lot about that over the course of this transition. He'll run it 35 times. He's got no problem winning this thing 17-7 or something, and, just controlling the clock. So if those guys are out, which big picture for this team would be a problem. But in this individual game, regardless of the quarterbacks, like the Bears just don't have a good roster. I think a lot of people that are like picking the Bears to be like some sleeper wild card team, I just think they're a year away from being in that conversation, assuming they hit on Justin Fields, which is an unknown. But their defense, I mean, I think stinks, Stuckey. I mean, I would just pick the Bears, or excuse me, the Packers. Plus, you're getting a point just on principle of just the roster construction.
Yep. Yeah, the Packers are significantly better overall than the Bears. Look at the offensive line. And when the Packers offensive line is healthy, it's one of the best in the NFL. The Bears offensive line was historically bad last year. They brought in, Nate Davis, he drafted a tackle, but Tevin Jenkins is on IR. They've got to move a bunch of guys around. Like, it's still a mess. Their defense was historically bad. I had them rated as the worst in the league last year. They went out and signed 2 high profile linebackers. Who cares in today's NFL? It's the least important position. And you mentioned the running game. Last year, the Packers swept the Bears. They ran it 67 times for 380 yards. It's an average of 5.7 yards per carry. The worst run defense in the league allowed 5.4. Fields in those 2 games, by the way, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And yeah, the Packers defense, not a huge fan of their coordinator, Barry, but a very talented defense with a lockdown corner. Bears defense is still just bottom of the barrel. The previous management just left this team, and it's just a mess, and it's going to take a while for them to clean it all up. You got to hope you hit on Fields, and then you've been shedding contracts and just trying to build a younger defense, younger offensive line. Bringing in a number 1 receiver is going to help Fields, but if you just dig into the numbers, the accuracy's still not there. He's going to have to run around a ton. The injury risk, too, for the whole season is obviously astronomical because the defense not going to get any stops. It's not like they're going to be blowing anyone out. So Yeah, I think that you nailed it. It's the better defense, better offensive line, just a overall better team. And I'm not a believer in Fields yet. Now he could prove it to me over time. And Love, I like what I've seen in a small sample size, but maybe he has it. I just don't think that Fields has it as of right now. And then the overall team is better. I'll happily take the points on the road here with the Packers and hope they get it done.
I actually think the Bears, if the season doesn't go well, and I don't think they're going to be very good, actually have a lot going for them. That they got DJ Moore in the trade. They're going to have a high pick. The Panthers have a chance to also be terrible. They have their pick.
Yep.
So it's if the Justin Fields experiment does not work out, it's not life or death. Now they're coming from a place unlike San Francisco, who blew a quarterback. They were winning and just kept on rolling. It feels worse when you're losing, but I do think you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, if you're a Bears fan, you root against Carolina every single week, which a lot of those weeks probably shouldn't. I don't know where you stand on them. I'm not trying to overreact to the preseason, but they don't have any weapons. The quarterback, I like the quarterback a lot, but God, he's small and he could easily get hurt behind an offensive line. He's not, for a little guy, you think kind of like, oh, he's Kyler Murray athlete. No, he's not a great athlete. He's a pocket quarterback. He's closer to Tua in the sense that like he's a thrower. He's not a runner, but he's tiny. So if one of these big defensive linemen, which literally every team has, imagine Vita Vea falling on that guy. I could see him. I mean, I'd be stunned if he's able to stay healthy all season long, especially the way he plays, because I love his game because he's fearless. But God, you better buckle up. But that's good for the Bears. Who knows? Like they could have like the number 1 pick and the number 4 pick. All of a sudden, you're looking at Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. or something.
Yeah, I would say that the division as a whole is pretty weak this year, but you can see the light for a lot of these teams, and everything's cyclical in the NFL. Like the AFC is so much better than the NFC overall, especially from a depth perspective. But that's going to change, right? Some of these aging quarterbacks, you got to pay them, and then those rosters get worse. In the NFC, right, you have the Lions, which are building a nice, good, young roster. When, eventually they're going to – Goff, I think, really limits their ceiling, right? And it's just when he has to go against some of these elite quarterbacks in the NFL, it's just not there. But they hit on a quarterback in the future. If Jordan Love hits – with this Packers team, which has a good young base. And then, the Bears, I like Eberflus as well. If either Fields hits or they get another young quarterback that hits, and the Vikings, I think, are making that transition too. Thielen, you mentioned on the Panthers, another guy they shedded. They're kind of resetting. Yeah. You have a franchise wide receiver, tackles, they're resetting. And then if they can hit on a quarterback, this division could be really fun again in a couple of years.
For people listening to this until, before the Sunday kickoff, I'm not a huge over-under guy just because I'm not a patient gambler. It's hard for me to wait that long to get the payoff. I have to put up so much up front to keep my juices rolling. But is there a team or two? Because picking the division, I kind of went chalk. I'm just very chalky. It's hard, in the NFC, like it's hard for me to think outside the box beside the Cowboys, the Niners, the Eagles, the Giants, Seattle. I mean, I think most of the teams last year, maybe the Saints and Tampa flip, but the AFC is a little more difficult. Is there a team that you don't like who's been good, or a team that hasn't been good, or, last year, like a Broncos, a Raiders, a Browns, that you could see making the playoffs? Because I know one team in the AFC I think is going to be really good this season. I'm not going to bet this game because I want the 49ers to win. I easily think the Steelers are going to be pretty good. And I think they got a chance not just to win that division, but be a real squad. And I wasn't the biggest Kenny Pickett guy, but a lot like, I think the 49ers are a good example for them. If you insert a guy that's just more than capable, and I hate to say this, but Mac Jones probably would have been this version if they would have picked him, you can just function and win 12, 13 games. Look at Purdy last year because of the talent they have around him and the defense. And I think the Steelers, I know they came on at the end of the year. Obviously, Tomlin took this preseason as seriously as any coach ever. I think they're like a 13-win team, and I got them. Obviously, as we're recording this, we'll see Kelsey's injury, just big picture. If it lingers, the Chris Jones situation, I'm not betting against the Chiefs as long as they got Andy and Mahomes. But I think the Steelers are a team that could give them some, they have a coach that knows what he's doing. They have a staff, that's been cohesive and just a legit roster. I could see the Steelers, and giving the Chiefs all they can handle as the season goes on.
Well, I'll throw out another team in there. I still need to see more from Pickett, and I don't really care what happens in the preseason, so I need to see more from him and I'm not the biggest fan of their offensive coordinator. And just schematically, I think he leaves a lot on the table, but we'll see. You know that they're going to pull off some upsets. Tomlin always does, which is going to help their case. It's a brutal path, a brutal schedule, brutal division. But a team that, if you want to buy the upside, I bet some Browns plus 400 to win the division. I project them to win double-digit games. The Bengals have a first-place schedule. There's some questions with the Bengals this year. You lose your two safeties, allowed you to do so much on that defense. Anarumo changed so much even within games. That's because he had two very reliable veteran safeties on the back end that just allow you so much flexibility. So we'll see. The Bengals offensive line still has some questions. They're going to be in the mix if they get in the playoffs because they have Burrow and those receivers. But the Browns plus 400, an easier schedule, and I'm just buying the upside of Watson getting back to slightly above average. Doesn't have to get back to his elite play when he was in Houston, but I love what they did in the offseason. They bulked up in the interior. To improve their run defense, right? You had to also improve at safety. They added speed at wide receiver, and then a defensive coordinator hire. It just went sideways there last year. There were so many communication issues on the back end. So if Watson can just, live up to even close to his expectation, you already have the running game. You already have that offensive line. I think the Browns are worth taking a flyer on. You want to buy the upside. You don't want to take the over on the win total in the AFC. But if Watson, because it's all about, can Watson actually get back to where he once was? I still have my doubts, but a plus 400 to win that division, I think it's worth a shot.
Because wasn't one of the issues is they went money ball. They tried to be super fast on defense, and they were small, and people just ran the ball down their throat. It's like, yeah, guys, these coaches, if you have a small D tackle and small linebackers, they will just run it all day long. Like, this isn't, you don't just have to pass because it's quote unquote a passing league, right? Yeah. And they could not. And then obviously Watson, when he came back, was, well, I guess Jacoby started the majority of the games. And what about two teams that, I guess if Russell were to bounce back, now he's been trending down for seasons, and the Raiders, I'm not trying to overreact to the preseason, but it feels like they just got a little more stability this offseason, obviously before Chandler Jones the last couple of days, but Jimmy and Josh more on the same page than Derek. Could you see either one of those two teams being a 10-win team? It's hard with the Broncos. I mean, I got to see it out of Russ before I believe, and Josh McDaniels' history as a head coach just hasn't been good. But if you do look at their individual games last year, remember how many one score, like they were leading and they would blow it? They weren't your typical 7-win team where they just suck. They were winning the majority of the games that they lost.
Yeah. Now, I personally can't. If you put either one of those teams in the NFC, they could make noise, win a division. In that division, in this conference, you're going to, against so many elite quarterbacks, I can't see it. Number one, the Broncos, by the way, are dealing with a ton of injuries too, heading into the season, which isn't ideal.
Lost wide receivers.
Running back, their right tackle. McGlinchey's just come back from injury. We'll see. The defense has all kinds of guys on IR. But I think Russ is cooked. So that eliminates them right away. I took their season win total under. Maybe Peyton can pull a rabbit out of a hat. But what made Russ so great was his improvisation, right? And he would run around, create plays, and he had one of the best deep balls in NFL history. It's just not there anymore, right? And we've seen it for years. And so I think he's cooked, as we've seen, and I'll believe that until we see otherwise. The Raiders, I'm not a McDaniels guy, and the defense, I just don't think that, especially on the back end, is good enough in the AFC to win enough games with a quarterback who's not elite and is going to, put up 35, 40 points and win you games in shootouts consistently enough to make noise in the AFC. So it's really difficult to see any team that doesn't have a top tier quarterback or a quarterback that could emerge into someone who becomes close to elite making a run in the AFC. Think about if you get in, right? Who you have to get past.
Burrow, Allen, Mahomes, Herbert, Lawrence. Yeah.
You have Lamar Jackson in a new offense. We'll see what he looks like in the
Aaron Rodgers.
The list. Yeah, we brought Rodgers to the AFC, and so it's a gauntlet. So it's really hard for me to see a team in the AFC that's in that middle tier really breaking through. It's very hard to make a case.
Yeah, that's another team that I'm going to pick to win the division. I'm going to take the over. is the Jets, just because I do think their formula is kind of going back to like when LaFleur first got there, offensively, run the ball and try to be one of the leading rushing teams. And unlike some of the Packer teams historically in Rodgers' era, their defense is undeniably pretty loaded. And their D-line kind of has feels of like that 1949er team that you just couldn't block anybody. And they got multiple waves. So if the formula, and I know people question their offensive line, they're not wrong, but if you lead the league in rushing, you can make average offensive line look good if you run the ball, right? And when your defense is just, they have a lockdown corner and an unstopped, like you can't block all these guys. So if they ever get a lead, which Rodgers, he doesn't get the credit for being like the cerebral Brady, Manning, Breeze, but like you watch him on Hard Knocks, the dude's a fucking savant. So he's not just ad-libbing all the time like Russ. Like he can play within the confines of the offense. I think the Jets are going to be good. And I think you're going to have a massive chip on this guy's shoulder, a little Brady 2020 version. And I think they're going to have to win some games if their offense is a little off, which they easily can defensively. I think their defense is going to be freaking dynamic.
Yeah, and if you dig into the advanced metrics last year, there was nothing fluky about it. There wasn't like a bunch of turnovers or fluke. Like it was just their D line gets ton of pressure. Sauce Gardner is the real deal. If you look at I was obsessed with him in college. He didn't allow a touchdown in 4 years. His numbers were absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And he came right in. I didn't think it was going to be that good right away, but when you have a lockdown corner, it can transition your defense even quicker. But the defense is there. It's all going to be on the offensive line to reach their ceiling.
For sure.
And then as long as Rodgers, and you said it with Rodgers, like last year, if they just had an average quarterback, they could have made noise, right? And they couldn't find any quarterback play. Rodgers in NFL history has a 1.4% career interception rate. Nobody in NFL history is lower. So he doesn't turn the ball over. He's not going to lose you games. But if he, in order to get through the AFC, no matter even how good the Jets defense is, you're going to have to score. That offensive line's going to have to hold up. But the most important thing is Rodgers is not spring chicken. He's going to have to stay healthy. So the offensive line is going to have to protect him. That's what I'm watching more than anything is, can Rodgers make it through the full season if the offensive line is getting cooked? So that might be the biggest thing to watch for the Jets. And then because if that happens, then you're right back to where you were last year.
You know what's funny about that number is ironically what makes him such a incredible all-time great regular season player. Sometimes like Aaron, you got to, push the envelope a little bit in the playoff game. And that's, that number, you got to take some chances. And maybe now he's got nothing to lose at 40 years old. And obviously a lot like Tom, you win with the Bucs or you win with the Jets, you talk about upping your legacy. I mean, especially the Jets. I mean, a franchise. The Bucs had won a Super Bowl recently and been good in the past. Like this team has sucked for the majority of my life. So
yeah. Well, another thing to say about Mahomes, by the way, you say Rodgers sometimes gets a little gun shy. Mahomes never gun shy. Mahomes third lowest interception rate in NFL history, 1.6%. Which is pretty crazy for some of the throws that he makes.
A good nugget. Well, Stuckey, glad to have you back. To let everyone know where they can find you and hear you.
Yeah, Big Bets on Campus podcast for our college football. Every week we'll preview the college football site. That'll be out Friday mornings. Our NFL preview with myself and Chris Raybon. That's out every Thursday morning. That's Action Network podcast. So Big Bets on Campus College, Action Network podcast. Find me on Twitter at Stuckey2. And all of my bets for free on the Action Network app at Stuckey2 as well.
Well, Stuckey, let's roll, baby.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Full Saturdays and full Sundays. The couch. It's nice to be back on the couch and hitting the bars with football on. So I hope everyone enjoys their weekend and wins some money.
Yeah, have some cocktails on me. Have a good one.
Absolutely.